Tonight. I think this is a great turnout for our first time in the Drake Commissary. Really glad to see you all out tonight.
You want the microphone?
Is it here somewhere?
Give me a second.
So just a brief thing, brief mention. Next week we have John Bunner and Robin Kaufman speaking at the Toplack session. I think we all know who those two people are, and I think that's going to be a special local talk or seminar here. I think it's going to be kind of wonderful. But tonight we have somebody who, I get to introduce somebody who doesn't need an introduction at all. I met him first at Tales of the Cocktail over 10 years ago, and a fine gentleman. He's been a distiller of gin for over 50 years. And started off with Plymouth, and then for 25 years, and then 25 years doing Beefeater. He's the creator of the Beefeater 24. The Burroughs. I like having examples of things, and a couple of gins that one can only get at the distillery, including one that I find really interesting. It's a new one called Monday's Gin, which hopefully we'll hear something about, because it sounds really exciting. Oh. And as well, the new Beefeater Pink, which I think we're all enjoying tonight in the cocktails that we're having just on our entry to the event tonight. So no further introduction, because he knows more about gin than the rest of us will. He's forgotten more about gin than the rest of us know. And so here he is, Mr. Desmond Payne.
Whoa! Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Good, okay. So, yeah, it's been a while, really, making gin. I can't believe 52 coming up. I do it because I love it. I enjoy my work. I enjoy the homework as well, actually, which is true. And what's really kept me enthused over the last, I don't know, 7-8 years, is the way that gin has suddenly come back as a important, exciting spirit. You know, things go in and out of fashion, don't they? So why gin all of a sudden? And it's partly fashion, it's partly cyclical. Things go in and out of fashion, kind of in rotation. We just wish we knew what was next, I guess. I'd be in there like a shop. But gin, I think gin works because, partly fashion, yeah, but partly because it's your generation, this generation of bartenders. I honestly believe that the bartenders today are better than ever have been. And I'm going right back to the guys who invented the classic cocktails way back in the 1800s, some of them. I think what happens now is that the enthusiasm and the skill and the everything else has really put gin on the map. And part of the reason that is that, again, your generation, we're all the same generation, kind of, aren't we? Within a century or two. People now don't want to be told what works and what doesn't work. We want to find out for ourselves. It doesn't matter whether it's cocktails or travel or what we wear or anything else. It's a much more individual lifestyle, and that gives bartenders something to work with. That gin just hits the spot. If I say that gin is different to all the other spirits, it's a pretty obvious thing to say. But what's different is that if you think of all the fabulous whiskies of the world, whether they're Canadian or Scotch or Japanese or whatever, they're very different in their style, very different in their flavors and everything else. But the one thing they have in common is basically whiskey comes from grain. and how you make it has a huge effect on the final product. In terms of material, whiskey is grain. Brandy is the grape. Really nothing else in there. Rum is sugarcane. That's pretty much all that's in there. But when you think about gin, it is anything you damn well want. And my goodness, now people are using, shall I say, less traditional botanicals in gins. And when I talk to our botanical suppliers, you know, my goodness, they're having a field day. They say people are coming up and saying, what have you got that nobody else is using? Because I want to make my gin different and unique and special. So it's an exciting time. And from the bartender's point of view, from your point of view, gin, because there are so many different flavors in a gin, it actually gives you something to work with that you can put your own individual slant and your individual character into. Because the purpose of gin, I really believe, the purpose of gin is to be able to mix with anything else you care to throw at it. If you do it with care and attention and love, you can create great things. And it's a very versatile spirit compared to the other. I don't want to say one-dimensional because there's a big range out there, but because of all the flavors in there with gin, it's really something to work with and be creative with, and that's what we all love to do. So that's partly why gin is so popular right now. I wrote down some notes, but I don't know why I did that. One thing, please, while we're all here today, if you've got any questions or you disagree with me, which happens, shout it out, you know. I don't just sit here and talk to you for 4 hours. Was it 5? Sorry, 4 or 5? Ryan says half. So, you know, if you've got any questions, shout out. If you don't know what I'm talking about or you disagree with me, now's your chance. You know, there's no such thing as a bad question. So I want to keep this a bit kind of interactive if we can, which is why I'm not good at making notes. So I guess I should go back to the beginning. And you've probably heard the history of gin a million times, I don't know, but it goes back to the early days of, and it's part of the story of why gin works as a versatile spirit. It goes back to the early days of distilling in Europe, particularly about 500 years ago. So alcohol has always been around, that's great, it just happens. You know, we get yeast and sugar ferments, produces alcohol. It can happen all on its own, it's great. But you have to think back in those days, unless you, I'm still a bit wary, water. I've got some over there just in case. Water, if you don't know where your water comes from, your water source, if you're not careful, it can make you pretty sick. And alcohol was important because it was safer than water. It still is. So people would take fermented alcohols like beers and wines and ciders, depending on what grew locally, fermented into alcohol, and was kind of safer than water. So for drinking, for cooking, for everything else, maybe not washing. So alcohol is important. But the trouble is that fermented alcohols like beer or wine, going back 500 years, no bottling, no kind of safe packaging. If you don't look after alcohol at that strength, it goes bad, and it can make you more sick than the water. So there's a problem. So distilling really started to get rid of this nasty water stuff out of the alcohol, make the alcohol stronger, so it kept better and it was purer. It's a neat answer, but it kind of works. So pretty spontaneously across Europe, people started distilling their locally brewed low alcohols. And they were pretty crude. They were not fine spirits for sure. And the distilling techniques were pretty crude. They just boiled it up through a kettle, condensed the alcohol vapor through a worm, and whatever came out the end, they just necked it, they drank it. No maturation, no separation of the different alcohols, full of methanol and goodness knows what. But it didn't taste good. The after effect was probably okay, but the flavor was not great. So gin really started by adding a flavor to this crudely distilled alcohol spirit to disguise the bad taste. And the flavor they used was juniper. And to this day, God, I spent a difficult couple of hours this morning with my boss saying, definitions of gin, what about juniper? Well, how important is the predominance of juniper? Or drinking pink gin, is that predominantly juniper? No, it's predominantly strawberry, but I'll come on to that in a minute. Or 3 hours, or whatever it takes. So this became, quite important. But juniper is the main flavour in gin and always has been. Juniper, always known for its medicinal properties. Mostly grown in Italy. Think of the old spice trades between Europe and the Far East. They were buying tea and goodness knows what in China and places and bringing it back all the way into Western Europe to Rotterdam and places like that, where the big spice markets were. But they were kind of trading all the way through. And when they came through northern Italy, they picked up juniper berries where they were growing and they brought them further west. And it was the medicinal. It's gone off, but you can still hear it's gone on again. It's the medicinal properties of juniper that really made it popular. So by adding juniper to this alcohol, it was kind of a win-win situation. The juniper disguised the bad taste of the alcohol, and the alcohol preserved the medicinal properties of the juniper. I've got a little switch down here that turns it off and on just to make sure everyone's awake. So that's the meaning of gin. The Dutch word for gin is Geneva, and the English word gin is an abbreviation of that. So, gin makes its way to England. There's one of these weird wars in England, in Europe. We're always fighting. Normally the English are fighting the Spanish and the French. I remind myself I work for a French company, Pernod Ricard, and we love them dearly. And I remind myself that our biggest market for Beefeater is Spain. We love them dearly. But we tend to fight in the old days. And the Spanish and the Italians ganged up, and they tried to acquire the countries of Holland and Belgium. The English were allies of the Dutch, and we tried to keep them out. And it was a 30 years war. God. Backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. But the English troops, the English soldiers going over to fight, they do what I guess I do when I travel to a new country. What do they eat around here? What do they drink around here? And they got to know the juniper flavoured spirits. And when they came back to England after the wars, they brought the recipes for gin with them. And it took off in a really big way. And I can see another microphone heading my way. And that's really, that's actually.
That's really good.
Yeah. Send back your empty, it's always a good policy. Environmentally friendly microphone. Gin, hugely popular in England then. Still really crude stuff. People making it domestically in their own households. Like one household in every 3 was making its own gin. Actually, it's getting a bit like that today, to be honest. With all the new gins coming out. But they were not good, and they were causing problems. They were causing, all the problems of alcohol and governments and everything else. There is an amazing statistic. In London, in 1741 or something, they did a survey, and they calculated how much gin was being drunk. And it was 11 million gallons a year in London. Population then 500,000. So, Parma and the baby all knocking back the gin happily and not doing any work and crawling around the gutters and selling their children and all that nasty stuff. So, governments, as governments do, took control. How do you control something? You put a damn tax on it, don't you? So they put a tax on it. So if you want to make gin, if you want to run a distillery, you have to buy a license. And that in 1750 was £50, a huge amount of money. Kind of money you need to buy a decent house in London, kind of thing. That's a lot. But what happened was that the people who had the money, the finance, to become legitimate gin distillers, they had commercial competition to be better than the guy down the road. So the quality of the gin began to improve. Some got left behind, to be honest. So that really started gin to become fashionable. Or become, not fashionable, but respectable, I suppose, out of the gutter in any way. Then you get the invention of cocktails. That's really what gets gin to be a fashionable, smart drink, as opposed to a real poor man's, tipple to just get you through the day. And there's something else that happened in about 1820, which is a significant date for Beefeater. Oh, we're nearly 2020, aren't we? Maybe we'll have a party. Maybe we'll have a few, I don't know. Maybe that's why I'm still making gin, waiting for the anniversary. In 1820, there's an Irish customs officer, Aeneas Coffey, and he invented the continuous still. And what that means is that from that point onwards, gin, spirit flavoured with juniper and other things, is not just flavoured to disguise the impurities of the alcohol. Once you have neutral alcohol from a continuous still, the flavours are there just to give it interest, character and everything else, because the alcohol is then pure. And that makes a huge difference. So all the gin brands that go back to 1760, I don't know what all the dates are, doesn't matter. The recipes must have changed, because be sure now they're using neutral alcohol as a base. And even the definitions of gin require it to be neutral alcohol. So it's a huge turning point in making a much more fine, quaffable quality product than in days kind of gone by. So what's happening now, of course, is, as I said at the beginning, gin has suddenly become fashionable, it's everywhere. When I started making gin, God, 1967. I know none of you remember 1967. You do? Now I remember you. I started in the wine trade, and I was working in Harrods store in London, bottling wine in the cellars down below. There's some fun stories around that for another day. But I joined a company in London who were wine merchants and gin distillers. And I had been working in every department for 3 months doing my training. And once I hit the gin distillery, that was me sorted. All these aromas, the botanicals, the juniper, the big bales of citrus and everything else, really fascinating flavors. So I started to enjoy gin. 1967, you will remember, that was the year of flower power, of the world changed in 1967. And there were two places you should be. You should either be in Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco or the King's Road in London. I had a flat on the King's Road in London, 1967. I don't remember a lot about it, but they sent me to bloody Plymouth. Plymouth, way down in southwestern England. And I spent the next, I don't know what I did wrong. I spent the next 25 years at Plymouth Gin. Loved it, a beautiful product, one of my favourite gins. I've got one or two favourite gins, one or two which I've made myself, to be perfectly honest. And that was my real kind of training with gin. And then, how businesses change in this world pretty rapidly. And Plymouth Gin got owned by a big English brewing company called Whitbread. And then Whitbread bought the Beefeater gin business from the family, the Burrough family. And the distiller retired. And they asked me to come back to London, finally, 25 years, and run Beefeater Gin, which was a great surprise. A great pleasure as well, even though I still love Plymouth. So Beefeater has, again, a great story to it. I mentioned 1820 as a significant date. James Burrough, the founder of Beefeater Gin, was actually trained as a pharmacist in London, actually in Devon, near Plymouth in fact. And he qualified as a pharmacist, and as soon as he qualified, he jumped on the ship and came straight here to Toronto. And he was a pharmacist on Yonge Street for about 4 or 5 years. I don't quite know what he was up to. Last time I was here, unfortunately about 7 years ago, I tried to trace his footsteps, because I really thought, oh, please let him have been in the distillery area, you know, that'd be a great story on a chance. But every year was a different address up and down Yonge Street, so he was a young man having fun, I guess. But he came back to London about the time of the American Civil War and had a change of career and decided to be, a sensible guy, a gin distiller. And he bought an existing distillery in Chelsea in London. That's where our 1820 provenance comes from. Not Beefeater, to be honest, the business goes back to 1820. So a clever guy, Burrough, and as soon as he bought this business, they made gin, they made cordials, alcoholic drinks, and liqueurs, and a whole range of stuff. And in those days, pretty much every parish would have had a brewery, a distillery, a couple of other things, just looking after the local community. So it was a very kind of local thing at the beginning. But Burrough put his mind to making a new gin, which is Beefeater, and that's still the recipe we use today. Have any of you been to the distillery in London? Yay! Oh, now I remember you. We moved out the Chelsea distillery when Burrough died and his sons took over. But that recipe that he put together is still exactly what we use. In my office at the distillery, opposite my desk is the portrait of James Burrough, the founder. And this guy is watching me to make sure I don't change this recipe, because it's going to be thunder. So when I make a new gin, which I do quite a lot now, I just kind of turn around to face the wall for a while and look at the wallpaper. And then bring him back to say, what do you think of this one then? Doesn't change his expression, I don't know how he does it. But he developed the Beefeater gin recipe, which we give him credit for sure. And he did one other thing, was to give it a really quite an early piece of branding. So instead of calling it Burroughs Gin, although that's Burroughs Gin with that bottle, he wanted to give it a really strong London image, and he took the Beefeater, the guard from the Tower of London, as an icon of London, called it Beefeater Gin. Which is, a kind of neat thing to do. And it's an association we really treasure. We know the Beefeaters well. There are 37 of them. They live inside the Tower of London with their families, and they're pretty much glorified tour guides these days. But it's a very ancient order, and we kind of know them well. They get a bottle of Beefeater on their birthdays. Anyone here get that? I don't. I'm okay for gin, to be honest. We take visitors to see the ceremony of the keys, where they lock down the tower every night, and they come into the distillery for their Christmas dinner every year with their wives and partners, and preferably not both at the same time. And we have it's a nice working association. So good for Burrough, he put it all together. Interestingly enough, you've all been trying, I must try it actually, Beefeater Pink, right? If you'd asked me 10 years ago, would I ever make a pink strawberry flavoured gin, I'd have probably walked out of the room. Seriously? What? Strawberry flavoured gin? Pink? Sweet? Ridiculous. But I'll tell you why in a minute, why I came round. But the Beefeaters, to be a Beefeater at the Tower of London, you have had to do 22 years undetected crime service in the military. So they're all ex-sergeant majors, and they shout at people, and they are big tough guys. They drink Beefeater Pink like it's going out of fashion. They've got a little bar in the tower, and it just, I've seen them queuing up the shop buying the stuff. It's really great to see. Never assume who your consumer, who your audience is. Everyone says, I love people in marketing. Of course I do. But things can get pigeonholed, and they say, oh, Beefeater Pink is more aimed at the female drinker. Not really. You tell that to a Beefeater, have your head chopped off, they can still do that, you know. So you never quite know who's going to love what you do, as long as you do it well. And I wasn't going to talk about Pink at this stage, but I seem you're doing it. 10 years ago, I'd have laughed it out. And then what we see is two things happening. One is that this new generation of drinkers, guys who are, is it 18 here, people drinking age? 19. You poor guys, my God. No, it doesn't matter how old I was. I'm always told not to tell these stories. I was at a boarding school in England, and one afternoon I escaped and went down to the town, and I bought, I don't know why, but I bought a bottle of Dubonnet. And I was walking back to the school with this brown paper parcel, Dubonnet shaped, under my arm, and of course I walked straight to the headmaster. And he said, "What have you got there, Payne?" And I said, "It's the bottle of Dubonnet, sir." And what an idiot. And he so innocent, no sense. And he looked at me and he said, "Don't drink it all at once." That is the best, most responsible lesson I have ever had on responsible drinking. Really it is. And that's what got me. I thought, yeah, drink is respectable. My dad was army. He thought I was going in the army. I didn't think I was going in the army. He said, "What are you going to do then?" "I'm going to the wine trade." And that was kind of okay. But God bless my old headmaster for not throwing me out. If there'd been a packet of cigarettes, I'd have been out, you know, that night. But he took that sensible view about not drinking too much. I've tried to stick by it since. See, now I've gone, oh, so Pink. Why was I talking about Pink? So, you kind of learn what you're doing through experience and experimenting. So, our biggest market for Beefeater is Spain. We do more than 1 million cases a year in Spain. Hope you're listening, Corby. And not only is it the biggest gin in Spain, it's the biggest spirit brand in Spain. So we love the Spanish really, because they pour big measures as well, in these huge glasses. And all of a sudden what we see is pink gin being popular in Spain. So it's gin that is not just pink in colour, but it's flavoured, whether it's strawberry or fruits or something else. And phenomenally, it just was like a rocket, all sorts of brands taking off. And what we see is that this emerging generation of drinkers who are now 19, 18 in Spain, probably 12 in Spain, I don't know, they are different. They don't want what their parents drank, that's fine. I didn't want to drink my parents drank. But they are very selective about what they drink, and they set trends, they set fashions. One of the things we learn about these drinkers of sort of 18 plus, actually they don't drink. It's the first thing we understand. They do other things, but they don't drink. So what we see in Spain is, Spain is a big beer market apart from gin, and something like 35% of Spanish beers now are not low, no alcohol. And it's a fashion, people just don't drink. But if you are going to survive and attract new generations of drinkers coming through, as gin has always done, then you have to move with the times. You can't be stuck in solid stone and never move. You won't survive. So pink gins became fashionable, and they said, we were a bit late, so maybe we should do one. I said, really? Honestly, I'm a distiller. Pink gin is not fully distilled, but the strawberries are not distilled. We don't have guys in a distillery crushing strawberries underfoot. I'll tell you exactly how it's made, because there are no secrets. And I said, really? Pink strawberry flavoured gin? Beefeater, honestly? And then I started thinking, well, why not? You know, if this is what people want to drink, who are we to say, not from us you don't, you know, we're far too important to make a strawberry flavoured gin. It's not what it's about. You have to attract your consumers, you have to nurture them, and keep moving, keep looking forward. It's not to say ever we would stop doing classic traditional Beefeater gin. It is a classic and it will always be there. But you have to experiment and do things. That's what James Burrough did. We've got stories of James Burrough. He was, I think, not making, but importing whiskies from maybe Canada, I'm not sure where. And he was trying to improve the flavour of whiskey. And in his recipe book, which I found in the archive, he said, I've thought of a way to improve the flavour of whiskey. I'm going to add some prune juice to it. I mean, say that to, you know, Octi in Scotland and the master blender of whatever it is. They'd fall off the bloody chair. But there's nothing new. You have to experiment, you have to move with the times. So I said, if we're doing pink, then let's make sure it's the best we can do. First of all, what is it? Pink gin is 100% distilled Beefeater gin. I'm going to tell you in a minute just how we do that, which I probably should have done before, but I'm not looking at my notes somewhere. So it's Beefeater gin and all the things to do for Beefeater. And then after we've made the distilled gin, we do two things. We add a strawberry flavour. It's a natural strawberry flavour. You have to be very careful with these things. Whatever you do is stable and it's not going to fall apart or go cloudy or separate or lose its colour or whatever else can happen. So we add the natural strawberry flavour, and then we add the colour, because it's pink. Strawberries are pink, you expect the strawberry gin to be pink. It's a colouring, it's an approved colouring. And there's a little sweetness to just strawberries are sweet, just to carry the thing through. And that's exactly how pink gins are made. Forget the old classic pink gin of a drop of Angostura bitters rolled around a goblet and thrown out onto the carpet and then like gin. That's classic pink gin. But these flavoured gins are the trend. And it's causing some interest, some controversy. A lot of traditionalists say it's not gin. So I need to talk a bit about definition. Definitions are not the same the world over. I know I had a long and difficult conversation with my boss this morning about potential change in definitions in the US on gin. I can have the same conversation tomorrow. I'm just going to try some of that funny water stuff. No, actually I'm not. I'm going to try some of this. Yeah, that's better. So, if I talk about European definition, it's pretty much the same around the world. So, gin is made from a basis of neutral alcohol. So, neutral is what it says on the can. It doesn't really taste of anything, there's no flavour. It's virtually ethanol. And depending on what it's made from, it won't have flavour, it'll have character. Generally speaking, grain. Beefeater is made from grain, from wheat. Some gins now especially are made from grape alcohol. I always detect a bit of grape coming through, it's very hard to get neutral. But let's just say neutral alcohol. Made from neutral alcohol, it is flavoured so that juniper, back to that juniper berry, is the predominant taste. How do you define something by taste? It's a really bad definition. Because we all taste differently. You know what I mean? So it's quite a difficult definition to work with. But it's pure spirit, juniper, and beyond juniper, anything else you want. It's what we call the botanicals. Beefeater is a classic gin. James Burrough in the 1800s used what was available in London at the time. So I'll read them off if you want to know, but it's juniper, coriander seed, pretty typical in gin, angelica seed, angelica root, citrus, very important, seville orange peel, lemon peel, almond, orris root. Orris is a root of the iris plant, and what it does is it kind of holds all the other flavours together. It stops the aroma dispersing too quickly. really important in gin. Used in cosmetics a lot, Chanel, a big Myers Morris. What have I left out? Licorice. 7, I remembered. And it's that combination of flavors in the right proportion. Each one should play exactly in the way you build a cocktail. Each one should relate to its neighbors and produce something that is different to the individual parts. And one thing I've learned with making gin, and I've made 10, 12 gins in the last 10 years, one thing I've really learned is that when you're dealing with flavor, 2 + 2 doesn't make 4. You suddenly get something totally different to what you expected by that combination of producing something new. And that's where all the excitement is. I can see you guys nodding. It's what happens every time you make a cocktail. That extra little drop of absinthe or whatever it is suddenly totally changes the nature of the drink you're making. It's exactly the same with making, with distilling gin. So basic gin then, neutral alcohol, which can come from virtually anything, flavored with juniper, etc. Sorry. There are some gins made just by adding flavoring essences to neutral alcohol. Not so many these days, but there are some. They tend to be cheaper cash and carry brands, that type of thing. Distilled gin, next step up the ladder. You take neutral alcohol, you put it back into a still, and then you add your natural botanicals, juniper berries and orange peel and whatever is your recipe, and then you re-distill it to introduce those flavors to the alcohol by distillation. So it's a much more crafted way of introducing flavor to spirit. That process of distillation is a barrier to certain things happening. So the first thing with distillation is you cannot get color through distillation, unless you've done something. Anyone here making their own gin, by the way? Oh my Christ. All right, good luck. You can't get color through distillation unless you made a big mistake. So anything distilled starts off clear and it's dry. You can't really get sweetness through distillation either. So if it ends up in the bottle a different color, as you would expect with whiskey or brandy or something, it's picked up color from maturation in wood or whatever else has happened. In the case of pink gin, it's picked up color because we made it pink. So distilled gins, you are able to, I think the expression is further enhance the original distilled distillate to add different elements you can't get from distillation. I think probably the best example is Hendrick's, where they add cucumber and rose petal after distillation. You can't really distill cucumber. You need oils to get flavor from distillation. Cucumber is all about water, so you have to do it in a different way. That's perfectly acceptable for distilled gin. Last bit of definition, London gin. Sorry, I beg your pardon. London gin, not geographically. You make London gin anywhere in the world. It's the method. So for London gin, you cannot add anything after distillation that will change the flavor. So all the flavor in London gin must come from that original distilled recipe of botanicals that you started off with. You can add water, obviously, to get the bottling strength right, and you can actually add more of the neutral alcohol you started with, but nothing that affects the flavor. So that bottle of Burroughs Reserve there we looked at, that's aged in cask, in Lillet casks. That's not London gin. It's absolutely Beefeater recipe, but because I've done something after distillation, I put it in the cask. Just giving it color and some flavor of the previous occupant and some wood flavors. It's not London gin. Doesn't matter, it's just in terms of where you sit in definitions. So those are the three definitions, but what we see increasingly is flavor gins, like Beefeater Pink. We've just done a blood orange gin as well. And everybody's doing it, and they are really, I judge in the IWSC, the International Spirits Competition, on gins. Coming up next month, I'm dreading it. We used to do vodka in the morning and gin in the afternoon when I started judging that competition. Now gin is 4 days. So a huge chunk, 1 day of that will be flavoured gins. And we now say, if you give us a flavoured gin to taste, you better tell us what flavour you're pretending to be, you know. And they are hugely popular and they're very successful. There is no definition of flavoured gin. So a lot of people get sniffy and say, oh, it's not gin, it's not predominantly juniper. It's not. Beefeater strawberry is predominantly strawberry, of course it is. It's what it says on the can again. So, people say, oh, it's not gin, you know, traditionalist, you can't do this. You have to. You have to be flexible. You have to move with the times. What's wrong is that definitions can't keep up. When I first came up to Beefeater from Plymouth, they put me on a committee of the Gin and Vodka Association. It doesn't exist anymore, which it did. And we were trying to get a definition for London gin. Because before that it said London gin is a type of distilled gin, so no added value. So we all got together, Gordon's and everybody else, and we said, okay, so what is London gin? How can we give it added sort of benefit, added qualification? And I said, well, it should come from London, shouldn't it? Because we were the only one in London then, and that was too late. So we put a lot of things around it, like methanol levels and how you can make it and this, that and the other. But that took 10 years to get that definition to a European law. Gin is moving too fast for definitions to keep up. As I got this horrible phone call tomorrow about US definitions.
So Brexit's a good thing.
Sorry?
Brexit's a good thing.
Yeah. I don't know that word. Is it a new brand of gin? Brexit and tonic, please.
Brexit London.
Oh, don't go there, please. Nobody. I tell you one thing. I've applied for an Irish passport. Like 28 million other people. It's taking a while. So it's about being fluid, about moving with the times. We need a definition for flavoured gins. But there's no definition for, it's not just flavoured gins, which is so big and exciting and important. It's things like Old Tom. You know, bartenders love to find old recipe books for cocktails, and they find Old Tom, especially pre sort of 1820s, where all gins were sort of pot distilled. And nobody quite knows what Old Tom is, but very often they're sweetened gins. There's no definition for Old Tom, but they're appearing. We get barrel-aged gins, like our Burroughs Reserve. There's no definition for barrel-aged gin, but everybody's doing it. So it's a bit like the cart and the horse, you know. It's not that it's wrong, it's just that the definitions can't keep up with it. You need to keep up with the times, you need to address modern generations, you need also to always keep an eye on the original. So, you know, that guy in my office watching me from the picture, Beefeater gin will always be Beefeater gin, but we will do other things as well. I made 10, 11 years ago, a brand called Beefeater 24, which is the first gin I ever made. I've been making gin for 40 years. Plymouth gin, follow the recipe. Beefeater gin, the man in the picture watching me follow the recipe. And he said, we want a new gin, Desmond. And I said, yes, my turn at last. Help, what do I do? Where do I start? What do I do? And when I think about all these new gins, they're all different. There are probably more than 7,000 gins out there now. And I think they differ for two reasons. It's what I call the what and the how. So the what is the recipe, juniper plus, whatever it is. That's where the flavour comes from. And the how is actually how you make it. Like Bombay Sapphire with vapour infusion, like some things we do for Beefeater, like when we put the botanicals in the still, we leave them for 24 hours to steep before we start making the gin. To give it sort of complexity. Everyone has their own method, and it's a combination of those two things that makes all these gins different. So I thought, right, new gin, help, what do I do? And I didn't want to change the how. That 24 hours steeping is so important in giving complexity and variety to the gin. So my option was to change the recipe. So I turned the guy around to face the wall for a while. And what do I use? I'd been in Japan about a year beforehand. And we have a joint venture with Suntory in Japan, a historical thing that goes back a long way and has never been finished. And I have to say, they worked me pretty hard when I go to Japan. There's not a minute to yourself ever. And by the end of the day, I'm ready for my Beefeater and tonic. But there's an issue. Some of you, I'm sure, have been to Japan. The thing about Japanese tonic water is they do not allow quinine. You can't put quinine into foodstuffs in Japan. So I mean, that's the essence. Like juniper and gin is quinine in tonic. It's what it's about. So Japanese tonic is different. So if the tonic water is different, my gin and tonic is different. So I think, well, there are many more ways of drinking gin. Let's try gin and something else. What's around me? As a soft drink, tea. Green tea, iced lemon tea, that kind of thing. Does that work as a mixer? Beautifully. Tea works with almost anything. Tea has this molecular structure that makes it work combine really successfully with other flavors, which is why you see so many tea flavored products around. So I was happy with my gin tea, literally. And when I thought about, sorry about that. I can't help it. Somebody pushed the start button and I started. So I thought, so tea works with gin as a mixer. Would it work in distilling? So I did a whole lot of tea tasting courses. God, they're boring. And I realized that the green teas were the ones that really worked. And I found a Japanese sencha tea and a Chinese green tea, and I added those to the James Burroughs Beefeater recipe. Everything I've done is built on Beefeater, including pink and everything else. And then I added grapefruit as well as the orange and lemon that's already there, so a third citrus. And I did a lot with it. It took me a year and a half to put that gin together. And this was all my own work. This was Desmond's gin coming out. You're going to have to bloody well wait. And the marketing department was saying, Desmond, how's this gin coming on? We've got a date in the diary for the launch party. Oh, that's a party. We've got the packaging design, and where's the gin? I said, I'm not quite ready yet. Then they said, do you know, with all respect, it'd be quite a good idea if somebody else tastes the gin as well before we launch it globally, which is a good idea. We put together a tasting panel in London of kind of the great and the good. It was Peter Dorelli, who was head bartender at the Savoy at the time, and I can't remember, but it was a high-powered gin, and I had about 7 gins lined up. So there was regular Beefeater, a prototype of 24, Plymouth, probably Tanqueray, 1 or 2 others. And each gin we tasted blind as a gin on its own with water, as a gin and tonic, as a martini with a twist, as a martini with an olive, and each one was marked out of 24 balance and whatever. And that morning when I was setting up this tasting, I was looking at this prototype gin, Beefeater 24, which I've been working on for a year and a half, and I was getting nothing from it at all. It was totally dead, totally flat. I thought, oh God, I've got all these guys coming in to taste it and give feedback. And it was a real low moment in my life, the worst time ever. And then we did the tasting, and the scores came in, and I said, by the way, the new gin I presented to you is number 5 on the list, or whatever it was. And we looked at the scores, and it had come out in the top 2 right across the board. And that was a huge moment. We had, I think we went out to lunch after that, and wow, yeah, we had a good lunch. And then we repeated the same exercise in New York about a week later with Sasha Petresky and Audrey Saunders and Gaz Regan, and we got the same result. So that was a great relief. So that's how it came about. 24, the age, not my age, the 24 hours that we steep botanicals before distilling. So that was a great success. Then I did a whole range of limited editions. I did a Beefeater Summer Gin, with summer botanicals. Well, I can't even remember what I put in them now, but I love, when I travel, I love to go to spice markets and find new ingredients. And I've been in Indonesia, in Jakarta, and I've gone to a spice market, and that's all these big sacks full of red, dried flowers. Oh, they smell great. What is it? I bought a bag, put it in my case. And it turned out to be hibiscus, and that ended up in the Beefeater summer gin. Then, of course, we did a winter gin with pine shoots and vanilla. And I'd say I've done quite a few, and then pink, the flavour gin is quite a new development, but always sort of moving the thing forwards. So it's an exciting time. Gin is on the move, it's never fixed in time, never should be. The purpose of gin is to work with other things. Not many people drink straight gin. My grandmother did, but that's another story. Gin should work, first of all it must work on its own, but it should have the ability excuse me, to work in whatever direction you guys want to take it as bartenders. And it will show its character. It's a bit like that lizard, the chameleon, that changes its colour to suit the environment that it's in. That's what gin should do. I don't think gin should be too much about itself, if you know what I mean. I get a lot of people asking me now, I'm going to make gin, sorry, I'm going to drink gin. Who invented straws? We're very anti-plastic these days, and we found in a cupboard at the distillery a whole box full of plastic straws, and we can't use them. So I'm saying, oh, quick, throw them away. I said, no, don't throw them away. It's the whole point of not using them. You're better to use them and then throw them away than just throw them away. You do origami or knit with them or do something, I don't know. No, I've totally lost that. And saying how gin is kind of flexible and everything else, it has to work in any direction. It's about now. Don't get too complicated. That's the message I say to people starting to make gin. I told a story earlier on today. About 2 years ago, I had a phone call from a guy I didn't know, and he said, an Irishman as it turned out, he said, look, you don't know me, I've been given your name, I'm going to start, this is absolutely true, I'm going to start making gin. Right. My stills arrive tomorrow. Can you tell me how much juniper to put in? Honestly, that's what he said. Come on, think about what you're doing. I don't know what I told him, I don't remember. I may have said 1 berry or a ton, or work it out for yourself. But I saw him about a year later at a sort of gin show in County Cork, and he came up to me and said, oh, come and try my gin, thank you for your help. I said, I'm sorry, there really wasn't much help, you know, but tell me how you've made it. And he said, well, back on the farm we grow apples, and we love the flavour of apples. So I make my own alcohol. That's a challenge for a start, to get neutral alcohol on small scale. It's done, but it's not easy. So, but because I love the flavour of apple, I only distill my neutral alcohol to 50% alcohol to really retain that apple flavour. And then I add some botanicals and redistill it. So I said, well, I'm really sorry to say this, but honestly, it's not gin. Because gin legally is made from neutral alcohol. Neutral alcohol is 95% plus, and yours is 50%. It's not neutral alcohol, therefore it's not gin by definition. So, well, the wife likes it. I said, fine, okay. But there are some gins now that are not taking proper care about what they're doing. Don't get complicated. If you want a new botanical, that's fine, but you don't have to row a canoe up the Orinoco River to climb the tallest tree in the forest to pick that flower that only comes out every 7 years as your botanical, you know? Because A, you can't get it again next year, and it's just overcomplicating things. Keep it simple. When I added the tea, yeah.
I'm just curious, when gin becomes liqueur, liqueur and gin? You know what I mean? Like with strawberry gin.
Well, strawberry liqueur is a legal term, and it's the amount of sugar. So once you hit 100 grams of sugar, is it 100? I think it's 100 grams of sugar per liter.
120.
120. Okay, maybe then it's a liqueur. How much you can sweeten gin before it becomes liqueur? Is there a limit? Who sets the limit, and why, and where? You know.
That's by definition, like you're saying.
Yeah. So, but there's no liqueur. There's no definition for liqueur gin either. It's either a liqueur or it's gin. And the only liqueur gin that has a definition. I'm sorry, I'm still talking European terms. Is slow gin, and that has a fully fledged. But to understand, slow gin is not gin. It's a liqueur. The way to understand slow gin is to think cherry brandy. Then it kind of makes sense. So the spirit base is gin, and the flavour and the colour and everything else comes from slow berries.
So strawberry gin doesn't.
But no, I mean in Beefeater Pink it's 5 grams of sugar per litre, so it's a lot less than tonic water, for example. You know. Never mind. There's nothing wrong with gin and tonic, is there? I'm diabetic, I had to give up Negronis a bit, but do you know how much sugar there is in Campari? It's scary. It's scary. But you know, there are defined limits, and it's not the same in every country. So you'd say it's 120 here for liqueur. Yeah. So that's a lot of sugar. And any other questions, by the way? I've finally got a question, that's great. Yes, please.
Since like New World gin started to collapse the category of gin,
Yeah.
and you're seeing like more and more like category collapse, do you feel like that's going to be good for traditional brands like Beefeater, or is it
Yeah.
a cycle front to the brand?
So if you didn't hear, the question is about New World gins and the categories kind of collapsing. Collapsing is one word, evolution I suppose is another one. But it's true. I often get asked to compare New World gins with traditional London style gins. And I can't do it. Because I think the breadth of scale of London gins and the breadth of scale of New World gins, the overlap is massive. So you can't really split them because they overlap all over the place. In terms of classic gins versus contemporary or just plain wacky, excuse me. My view is that gin now is in revolution. Anything goes. People say, who says we can't do that? Why must I do that? Why can't I make a pink strawberry flavoured gin? So there's no definition. So what? People love to drink it. So there's an element of that happening. And it's happening all over the place. Things are shooting off in weird directions. You know, gins that change colour when you add tonic or there's nothing wrong with that as long as there's a reason for it, you know. And just what I hate to see is something that's too gimmicky. But so I think gin is a revolution. Anything goes. There's some weird things happening, some great things happening. There's a huge amount of excitement around the whole category. Thank goodness there is. I think what will happen is there's no sign of it slowing down. It's the first thing. I don't think the bubble is going to burst, but there's a hell of a lot of gins out there now. I think it will just begin to deflate. And what will happen is, as a result of that, when it all quietens down a bit, we see the people going back to classics. Kind of, you've had your fun now, just understand what it's all about. But they won't necessarily be the same classics that are out there today. So the whole pack will kind of reshuffle, and we get new classic gins emerging. Some already are, things like Sipsmith, you know, hugely popular. I regret showing those guys around my distillery 10 years ago. I should be on at least 10% by now. They did take me out to lunch, but that's not enough. You know, it will settle down, and there will be new classics. And I'm sorry, but some of the gins that are starting up now will not survive. The market is saturated, but nobody's slowing down. So it's exciting. And it's exactly what I'm doing with Beefeater. Classic Beefeater gin hasn't changed. And the other distilled gins I do, I'm looking at all sorts of other things that I'm not going to talk about because they may not happen. But I'm looking at spiced flavours or smoked flavours. I'm not saying we'll do them, but we look at it as fully distilled gins. We probably won't go down the line of flavoured gins too much with Beefeater. There are other brands that can do that, maybe within our own Pernod Ricard portfolio. But there's room for an awful lot out there. But there will be new classics, I'm sure. I'm going to hang around and see what happens for a little bit longer. Anybody else got some questions? I don't know how we're doing on time, I have no idea. About right. Yes, please.
Kind of a two-part question.
Yeah.
What's the most unique botanical you've ever played around with? And what botanical surprised you the most when you taste or smell it initially and then distill or macer it or...
Yeah. Good question. Most unique botanical I've ever... I guess it doesn't sound hugely exciting. It's probably tea. Probably the first one. I was not trying to make a tea flavoured gin. It's just part of that balance of flavours. Balance is the key. Balance is the key to making a cocktail, to making a gin, to doing anything else. Lifestyle, whatever it is. So tea was quite new for me, and it was hugely exciting to work with. The other thing, sorry, the thing about was...
have you ever...
Oh yeah. Something that didn't do what I expected it to do. Oh yeah, plenty of those. I think it was actually in the summer gin I made. I used, oh no, it wasn't. It's a thing called London Market Gin. So what I did, we're all led by marketing departments, bless you. And I said, Desmond, why don't you follow through in James Burrough's footsteps and go around the London markets and see what new botanicals there are now that weren't there in his day, and I could kind of, do another version, which I did. And one of the things I came up with was pomegranate, and a couple of other things as well. And I started distilling. When I make a new gin, it's always an addition to classic Beefeater. Doesn't need to be much, you just change that balance, put it in a different place. And I normally just do a distillation of the new botanical, see how it performs in distillation, and then I introduce it to the rest of the family. I always think of flavors as a family. And some families, everyone gets on fine, and that's great. But if you introduce a new member to the family, the first thing, it must actually get on with everybody else, so there's going to be a fight, and the flavors will clash. But if it is accepted, it's not just an add-on, because it changes the relationship between everybody else to accommodate it. So it's not just a plus, it's a total reassembly. So when I distilled pomegranate, it was interesting flavour, lots of drinks with pomegranate in them. But when I tasted it, it's a really bitter flavour. And I thought, oh God, that's, it's too much, it's too much. And what I did in that case was I just increased the amount of licorice a bit to give it that bit of sweetness to balance it off. So things don't always work as you expect them to. That's why you look at so many options. You can't just say, I'm going to use that because someone told me to use tea or whatever it is. You have to experiment. And I keep coming back to this. It's the same as making a cocktail. It's how things work and just that fine balance of getting that wow factor into something that's not just there in its individual components. Does that kind of make sense? Great. Yes?
What's been the most surprising usage of the classic Beefeater recipe for you?
In terms of...
You've been counting.
In terms of drinks, I mean, cocktails?
Drinks, cocktails, anything, yeah.
Wow. Somebody had a lunchtime? No. I'm not sure. I think a well-balanced gin will work in many directions, so it kind of works. But I've had, I'm trying to think. I mean, some combinations just do not work. However hard you try.
Let's say surprising positivity.
Oh. I mean, not surprising, I suppose, and nothing new, but something I always forget. I do enjoy a nice dry martini. And what I always forget when I order a martini is what I enjoy even more is a Gibson. And still, it's amazing how many bars just don't have those little onions, those little beauties. And I was, oh, actually, twist or olive. No, actually, if you've got onions, I have Gibson. And just those 3 little onions on a stick, one at the beginning, one halfway through when you're beginning to feel a bit jolly, and one at the end where it's all saturated with the gin. It's just a lovely experience. It's a classic thing, but it's not nothing new, but it just hits the spot every time. Right in the back.
So when you're referring to the neutral spirit,
Yeah.
so that would be basically like the eau de vie, because when you mentioned like the other guy's gin who
Yeah.
made it from apple, and you guys mentioned that you normally primarily make it from grape. Does it have to be a specific fruits? Or
No, it doesn't.
Open-ended like
But actually, it's not an eau de vie, because
Okay.
it's a stage further. So if you think of a continuous still, the further up that last column you go, the more flavours you're knocking out of the spirit. And right at the top, you get something with no flavour left, but just the alcohol, the ethanol.
Okay.
That's neutral spirit. At 96%, 96.5, it's not. There's no room to carry any flavour molecules at that strength. So you get a very pure spirit. So whether it's from grape or from grain or from milk or from in New Zealand, there are a lot of distilleries using whey, the byproduct of the dairy industry, and you get it ferment and you distill it and off you go. But it is unflavoured, and whereas eau de vie really still maintain quite a lot of the flavour coming through from the grape usually.
Thank you.
Earlier you mentioned straws, and Pernod Ricard does a really good job with sustainability. Has Beefeater, because you're such a big company, found any production problems in the last 10 years with the changing climates in Europe?
No, except the price of juniper never goes down. Juniper, the one thing you have to have in gin, juniper is not cultivated, it grows wild. And most of ours is Italian. And last year I bought 65 tons of juniper berries. And what happens is they come, sorry to any distillers in the room, no I'm not. What happens is they go out and they get a license and they forage on like common land, and they pick juniper berries and they just knock them off the tree with a stick, and they go to a local cooperative and they sift them and sort them and all this kind of thing. And when I'm buying juniper, I would look at anything up to 200 samples of juniper from that year's crop. And I assess them, I do a distillation, get the oils out, get a nosing sample, and out of those 200, I would mainly buy 4 or 5 to recreate the Beefeater brand blend that I need. As one of the advantages of being big scale, you have all the options of blending. Really hard to do a small scale. If you're only buying 2 bags of juniper a year, the chances of actually matching that on next year's crop is bloody difficult. I was in South Africa a couple of months ago, and I spent a bit of a holiday there and drove around, and like anywhere else, gin distillery, around every corner. And one of them I stopped and went in to say hello, and they were just bubbling away in a corner, and so I make gin as well, and so this guy does, he's just up the road, and I said, I'm from Beefeater, and a bit. So, but they started asking me questions, and they said, look, we've got juniper here, and they had 2 bags of juniper under the bench at the back of the room. I said, how long does juniper keep? And I said, it depends how you store it, where do you get it from? Is it European? Yeah, and they gave me the name of the supplier. I said, that's where I buy my juniper from, that's other people. I said, but you've got to keep it in good condition, otherwise it'll rot, it'll just go, into a mush. So it's very hard on small scale to be consistent. There's huge excitement around it, but you have to just be a bit careful. And larger scale, we've got 5, another one going in soon, big gin stills at the distillery for Beefeater. And we blend all the production for a week as a batch, so we get very consistent quality, which you expect from a brand. Something like Burrough's Reserve, every cask stage it in is slightly different, so every batch is different. But regular stuff has to be the same. Yeah, back there.
You mentioned a few minutes ago Hendrick's gin.
I did. Did I?
Yeah, which a lot of people, I guess, credit with kickstarting like the craft gin revolution.
Yeah, I did, I think.
And you have this gin that has sort of a more exotic botanical structure and an ostentatious bottle design and a signature serve. And when I think about that, I think that happened 20 years earlier with Bombay Sapphire, where you have an exotic bottle design and some botanicals that are out there. But gin didn't explode massively. And I was wondering, because you have such a long history in the business, what conditions you think existed in the early mid-2000s that made gin really take off?
Yeah. I mean, those two brands were pretty pioneering, for sure. And even my 24 was kind of just before the rush, if you like. What is it? It's like you start an avalanche, you get that one little movement of a rock up a mountain and suddenly it picks up momentum and all of a sudden the whole thing is moving. What starts it can be something quite small. And it's back to those things I said at the beginning partly. It's about fashion and about people being more and more willing to be brave enough to try things and experiment and do things their own way. And that just took up momentum and came as literally an avalanche, I suppose. You had something else to say?
I was just curious if it's a trade secret, then don't worry. But from start to finish, how long approximately does it take to make Beefeater?
From start to finish?
From mash to bottle?
Yeah, well, okay, so we don't make alcohol. We buy neutral alcohol.
Okay.
Virtually all the big gin brands do. I mean, Diageo produce their own neutral alcohol, which would go into Tanqueray and Gordon's, but not exclusively. They're buying from the same people we're buying from. So I regard neutral alcohol as a commodity. That might be sort of, scary words to say to some people, but it is. It's what it says on the can. It's neutral, it's clean, it's consistent. So that is made at a big neutral alcohol plant. How long it takes from wheat to, and it's just, but the fermentation and the mashing, is a few days, and then you're there. So in terms of making that into gin then, for us it takes a day longer because we do this 24-hour steeping process. So we get alcohol in, it goes into the still, we add the botanicals, we leave it 24 hours, and then we turn on the steam, and it takes about 7 hours to do the actual distillation. And it's done. Comes off our stills like pretty much all, I think, about 80%. And then we batch it up and reduce it for bottling.
So why buy neutral as opposed to distilling it yourselves, or that's just
we could. We never have. It's a pretty specialist thing. I mean, I kind of love the idea of making everything from start to finish, but it's really, I'm sure it's really difficult, and it's really hard to be consistent. And in a big brand, you have to be consistent.
Yeah.
By buying neutral alcohol, I regard it as a commodity. We check it very carefully, make sure every batch is right. But for me, the important thing is turning that neutral alcohol into the right balance of flavors in Beefeater. And the distillation is in about 7 hours, and then the 24-hour pre-steeping. Yes, please, another gin distiller, yeah?
There you go. So when you're doing that steeping, how does the proof of the alcohol that's steeping in affect the flavor?
So the alcohol is like 96%.
Yeah.
When we put it into the still, we reduce it to about 60%.
Okay.
and we add the botanicals, stir it up and steep it. And if you actually, even after a couple of hours, if you open up that still, the amount of flavour that's already gone into that spirit. What actually happens is the first 4 or 5 hours, it's not really changing because the botanicals are absorbing the alcohol. And then once they're saturated, it starts to give it back, and that increases. We've just done a small run of gin that we call Monday gin. And Monday gin is, some of you have heard of it, some of you have tasted it, somebody's got a bottle. If we go home on the weekend and drink gin and have fun, if we want to make gin on Monday, we have to charge distillers on Friday. So the gin we make on Monday has been steeping not 24 hours, but 72 hours. So we've always, for the last 12 years, we thought, what a neat thing to do to have a Monday gin. You know, bartenders just love the idea of it. And it's just got that extra flavour. It's like, I call it beefed up Beefeater. I beefed it up a bit further, I drink it at 48%. And that's just exclusive to our little distillery shop. But it's changing not the what, but the how, giving it extra time. So everything makes a difference. There's somebody over there at the back. Yes, please.
I had a question about like the distilling the botanicals. I guess like teas, certain teas take different, like need to be steeped for a certain amount of time to extract the ingredients at the right temperature or time. Do you just throw all the botanicals in for the same amount of time?
Yes.
Or do you kind of separate some to optimize?
No, everything goes in together. And one of my big concerns with Beefeater 24, with using tea, you know, if you leave tea around for too long, it oversteeps and you can't drink it, just becomes too tannic. And I thought, how am I going to steep tea leaves for 24 hours and produce something that's drinkable at the end of it? But actually the extraction you get cold on alcohol is different to the extraction you get hot on water. But when I'm distilling, when I'm doing the cut at the end of the distillation into the tail, into the faints, typically with a distilled gin you might lose 5%. It's not the alcohol is pure, it's just the flavours get a bit stewed, so you don't want that in the gin.
So you get rid of
Make the cut.
bitter?
A little bit at the beginning, just to flush through the system, to be honest. But because I'm using tea in Beefeater 24, I make that cut much earlier. I actually discard 30% of the rum. The accountants hate me. I don't care. Because those tannins start to build up. And when you taste 24, behind that sort of, you get the citrus at the beginning, the grapefruit and everything else, and then you get, as in all gins, that juniper kick in the middle. And behind that, you get the softer tannins building up, and then we make the cut, and that's it. So everything works in a different way. Yes, please.
It's kind of an interesting thought. When we're talking about gin definitions not existing quite yet, like it's
Well, for all the gins that exist.
Yeah, and with modern gins, I feel like modern gins has just a huge category of just anything that's not juniper based. Do you think it's possible we could end up with gins that have a specific botanical that's not juniper, but it becomes its own class of gin that's, say, pomegranate berry or something?
So does gin have to contain juniper? Well, so there are two questions. Must it be predominantly juniper, which is the current definition? So Beefeater strawberry pink is not predominantly juniper, it's predominantly. But what if you have no juniper at all? That's your question. Is it gin? No. But you need to think of a new name for it. And for years I was saying, you know, all right, if you don't want predominance of juniper in your gin, that's fine. You might have produced a beautiful drink consumers love to drink. They don't give a damn about definition, to be honest. But you better think of another name for it, because it's not gin. Now I'm doing it myself, you know, so I've caught myself on the foot. But there's, you know, it's evolution. But there was a publication in the UK called Imbibe, I'm sure it exists here, and they had a whole full-page article basically saying what on earth is happening to gin. They were having a bit of a go at all these flavoured gins. And right in the centre of this page was a bottle of Beefeater pink. I thought, oh God. and they said, this is the one we like. I said, thank you. Because and it's partly back to this 24-hour steeping. I think what happens is that gin, juniper-led Beefeater characteristic comes shining right up through the strawberry and everything else. So to me, it's still definitely gin. Predominantly juniper. Who says by taste? Come on, huh? And where's the gin police, you know? So it's a really difficult thing. It's a hugely contentious. There are gin distillers who are, you know, out for blood with people making flavoured gins and say it's not gin. But you can't just stay in Aspic, Stone, whatever it is.
It's not that, like, North American gins sort of suck often because our juniper is very, very different, right? Like the dry look like hyperlocality and production has meant that like most people sourcing juniper from their regionality don't get the same product in any real way that you do in, say, Italy.
Well, juniper and any other botanical for that matter, let's talk juniper. It needs to be Juniperus communis. That's the Latin name for that particular style of juniper. That's the one that makes the flavour that is gin. But I don't know if it's the same in Canada, but certainly in the US, you can make gin from original distillation of juniper berries. And there's another juniper, there's a sort of big red, fleshy juniper, Juniperus, God, I've remembered all these names. Juniperus oxycedrus it's called. It's a big red berry. It's rotten for distilling, but ferments beautifully. So, you know, it's horses for courses a bit. But like the guy in South Africa, he was buying his juniper berries from Italy. I don't know if there must be huge junipers growing in Canada and the West, and here, I guess.
Oh, yeah,
but it's all about, it's why I look at 200 samples every year to buy 5, is to look at the options. And it's then about being consistent year on year when the crop isn't. And again, that's easier, large scale. It really is.
And this is more personal than craft related, but do you get jealous of some of the young distillers who get to have creative freedom and pump out small batch gins when you have to kind of meet market, make pink gin, and still meet, like honor yourself, but you're at the will of Beefeater when people are just pumping out things that they want to make all the time and putting that to market?
No. No, I mean, let me be clear. I have huge respect for people who are starting up and making gin. I really do have great respect. And like these guys I was talking about, you know, they were passionate about what they're doing. It's like the bartending community, they're passionate about what they're doing. Not everyone gets it right every time. That's what happens. I think I've actually got enough autonomy to have some influence on what I do. That sounds terribly big-headed, you know.
No,
it's part of the reason I'm still there, to be honest.
That's why they call you master.
Yeah, well, that's an expression dreamt up by marketing. Master Distiller. There was no such thing. We were distillery managers, you know. And actually, I think it was we had a great brand director called Nick Blackman, who was there with the Havana Club. And when I made Beefeater 24, he wanted me to travel around and introduce it to the markets. Great. He had one hell of a party here in Toronto, I remember. And he gave me the title Master Distiller because the whiskies all had master blenders, so you know. And now, you know, everyone's a master distiller. I don't know what it means. There's no qualification as such. You can qualify in distilling, but it's fine. You know, it's, of course,
do you still feel like you have creative? You have the opportunity to be a creative person.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I like Beefeater 24 was all my own work. It doesn't happen that way now because it goes through legal and it goes through compliance and, you know, does it go blue after 48 hours or does the colour fall out of it or whatever. But 24, I did it and that was it and it still is the same. Which is good. You need those controls around you. But if we want something new, they'll say, we're thinking about doing X, Y, Z. And I'll say, you might say, not on my watch, or actually, have you tried P and Q and R, you know, and because I remember we did that before, it didn't work, won't work now. So I have I don't know, it's autonomy, influence, I guess. Yeah. An age. And first experience, yeah. They kindly call me the world's most experienced gin distiller, and we had a brand ambassador in those days called Dan Warner. Some of you might know Dan. He's with 86 Company now, and he said he's not the most experienced, he's just the oldest, which is true. I think I've totally run out of time, but I'm happy if you are. Andrew, how are we doing? You going to throw us out? Okay. Throw me out, somebody. Please say one question.
When you first started out,
God. Was a boy.
Everything you've learned with regards to gin, with regards to distilling, is basically just been learning from a mentor, or have you done or taken any courses or gone to do something with like Harriet Watts or?
Yeah. So the question, if you didn't hear in the back, was when I started out, did I have to do any courses, any qualifications, and was there a mentor that sort of taught me? No qualifications. Harriet Watts weren't doing distilling courses in those days. Thank God, I'd never have passed. I actually, before Plymouth, I worked in London with a brand called Seegers. Doesn't exist now. Seegers Gin. It's the first company I worked for, Seeger Evans, and they owned Plymouth and so on. And the distiller there is a great guy called Philip Milner, and he taught me how to make gin. And we moved the London production down to Plymouth and made both brands down there, and he was down there as well. And he sort of, but it wasn't. I remember when Philip retired, there was no kind of succession planning. I'm not sure there is now, to be honest. Why I'm still here. And Philip was going, and it was kind of assumed that I would sort of take over as the guy in charge of the production of Plymouth. But there's never anything said, and I remember waking up in the middle of the night screaming, thinking, how on earth am I going to know which juniper berries to buy when the crop comes around next? And I think, Philip been doing that for years, how was I going to, you get on and you do it and you find your own way. When I first went down to Plymouth, the distillery manager was a guy called Bert Roberts, and he was a great character. Bert had a great expression, and he said, the graveyards are full of indispensable people. So in other words, it carried on. Somebody asked me this afternoon, what's happening about succession planning? How am I involved in what's going to happen when I finally decide I've had enough? Anyway, that would be. And my first answer is, well, it's not my problem, frankly, it's your problem. It'll carry on. There's still them there, know what they're doing. They make the cut, they know the samples. I don't stand there watching the kettle boil. I'm drinking cocktails in Buenos Aires, so what are you guys? It'll go on, I've actually been told this year one of my objectives to put a plan in place for succession planning. I've been talking about that for 10 years. But it'll be fine, it'll carry on. I'm just custodian, and it's the man in the picture, it's driving course. Are we all ready for a drink? Thank you so much. It's been a real privilege and a pleasure to have the chance to speak to like-minded people. It's great. Thanks for your time. It's great to be here again. I love doing what I do. We all do, I think. Thank you.
I just want to also say thank you to Corby for sharing Mr. Payne with us tonight. Their generosity is unbelievable and really kind of inspiring and touching, and what a great company, what supporters consistently of the bartending community and the spirit community here in Ontario.
Oh, that's what I was going to say. So, where are you?
You guys created the version, I'm going to steal this.